The ICU monitor screamed beside the child's bed, a sharp alarm slicing through the ward. Green lines on the screen jittered wildly as the heart rate spiked. Daniel Carter moved before anyone else could speak. His hands were steady, his voice calm. "Stay with me, kid," he said softly, adjusting the oxygen mask. 2 minutes. That was all the window he had before the numbers could turn worse. Around him, the night shift exploded into motion, nurses crossing the room, a crash cart rattling across the floor, someone calling for respiratory support. Daniel focused only on the child in front of him. The alarm softened. The monitor steadied. For a moment, the room breathed again. Then the ICU doors burst open. Karen Whitmore strode inside like she owned the hospital. In her hand was a printed report, the paper shaking with anger. She didn't lower her voice. "Daniel Carter has been neglecting patients during his shifts," she said loudly, "because he's too busy playing single dad." Heads turned. Nurses froze. Karen lifted the paper higher. "I've already sent this complaint to hospital administration," she said, "and to family court." A few staff members stared at Daniel with sudden doubt. Karen leaned closer, her voice colder now. "Maybe single dads should stop pretending they can handle both." Daniel said nothing. His eyes stayed on the paper in her hand, because the timestamp printed on that report was impossible, and the CCTV camera above the hallway door was still blinking red. That was the moment Daniel understood something chilling. Someone inside this hospital wasn't just trying to embarrass him. They were trying to destroy him. Daniel Carter's life ran on alarms, not just the ICU monitors that shrieked through the night, but the quiet alarms of responsibility that began long before sunrise. His morning started at 6:10 a.m. sharp, not because he loved routines, but because Lily's inhaler needed to be taken at the same time every day. The small kitchen in their apartment filled with the smell of toast, while Lily sat at the table swinging her feet. "Deep breath first," Daniel reminded gently. 8-year-old Lily Carter lifted the inhaler and followed the routine they both knew by heart. "Breathe in, hold, count to 5. Her asthma wasn't severe, but it was enough to keep Daniel constantly alert. A sudden cold. Too much running at school. Even dusty air could trigger a wheeze that made her small chest tighten. And every time it happened, Lily reached for the same person. "Dad?" Daniel always answered. After school drop-offs came sleep. Short, restless sleep. ICU nurses on night rotation didn't have the luxury of perfect schedules. By evening, he was back in uniform, hospital badge clipped to his chest, stepping into the bright white corridors of St. Bridget Mercy Hospital. Inside the pediatric ICU, the world moved differently. Machines hummed constantly. Nurses spoke in calm, precise tones. Parents waited beside hospital beds with quiet fear in their eyes. Daniel was known there for 2 things: his patience and his silence. He rarely argued, rarely complained. Even when the shift stretched long and exhaustion crept into his bones, he simply kept working. But not everyone respected that quiet strength. Karen Whitmore had never liked him. Technically, she wasn't even hospital staff in his department. She worked on the administrative floor, 2 levels above the ICU. Paperwork, scheduling, internal reports. Yet she found reasons to appear in the ward more often than anyone thought necessary. Karen was Lily's aunt, and the older sister of Daniel's ex-wife. The divorce 2 years earlier had been ugly. Accusations, shouting, endless legal paperwork. Daniel had fought hard for custody, and the judge had granted shared arrangements. Karen never accepted that outcome. In her mind, Lily belonged with her sister, not with a father working night shifts in a hospital. Daniel had tried to stay polite around her. For Lily's sake. For peace. But Karen had a habit of turning every encounter into a quiet attack. "You look tired, Daniel," she once said during a hospital corridor meeting. Her smile was thin. Raising a child alone must be overwhelming. What Daniel eventually learned was far worse than insults. Karen had friends in administration, real ones, people who processed incident reports, staff evaluations, internal complaints, and 3 weeks from now, Daniel would be standing in a courtroom again. A custody review hearing. Karen's sister was trying to prove one thing: that Daniel Carter was too distracted, too exhausted, too irresponsible to raise his own daughter. The complaint Karen waved in the ICU was not random. It was evidence, or at least it was supposed to be. But when Daniel finally read the document later that night, one detail froze him in place. The complaint included a patient chart access record. According to the hospital system, Daniel had opened a critical patient file at 2014 a.m. There was just one problem. At 2:14 a.m., Daniel Carter had been 20 minutes away in the emergency pharmacy collecting medication for another nurse. Someone had accessed that patient chart using Daniel's ID, and Daniel knew something else with absolute certainty. He hadn't even been inside the ICU building at that moment. Morning rounds in the pediatric ICU usually moved with quiet discipline. Doctors reviewed charts. Nurses updated medication boards. The ward carried its usual low hum of machines and careful voices. That morning, the rhythm shattered. Karen Whitmore stepped into the nurse's station with a stack of printed papers and the confidence of someone who had already decided the outcome. Her heels clicked sharply across the tile floor. "Everyone should probably hear this," she said loudly. A few nurses paused mid-conversation. A junior doctor looked up from a tablet. Daniel had just finished updating a chart when Karen placed the report on the counter between them. "This concerns patient safety," she announced. Her voice carried across the entire ward. Daniel felt every pair of eyes slowly turning toward him. Karen tapped the first page. "Daniel Carter left the ICU floor during a critical monitoring window," she said, "and accessed restricted patient charts from another station." Someone behind Daniel whispered something under their breath. Karen continued, louder now, and while he was supposed to be monitoring patients, he was apparently dealing with personal family issues. The implication hung in the air like smoke. One nurse shifted uncomfortably. Another quietly stepped away from the station. Karen crossed her arms. "I understand being a parent is difficult," she said, "but hospitals don't run on sympathy." Her eyes moved deliberately across the room. "They run on responsibility." Then she delivered the line she clearly wanted everyone to hear. Maybe single dads should stop pretending they can handle both. The silence that followed felt heavier than the machines around them. Daniel kept his expression neutral. Inside, though, something colder had begun to settle. Because while Karen spoke, his eyes moved to the report she had placed on the counter, specifically to the digital access record printed in the middle of the page. 02:14 a.m. The exact time the system claimed Daniel had opened a restricted patient file. A time Daniel knew by heart. Not because of the chart, but because of Lily. That was the moment his phone had vibrated violently in his pocket during his break in the hospital pharmacy corridor. The school nurse had been calling. Lily had suffered an asthma flare during a late evening school activity and needed her inhaler immediately. Daniel remembered the panic in the nurse's voice. He remembered rushing out of the pharmacy after handing medication to another nurse. He remembered calling Lily while walking back through the secondary corridor, trying to keep his voice calm while she struggled to breathe on the other end of the phone. Which meant something important. At 2014 a.m., Daniel Carter had not been sitting at a computer terminal opening a patient file. He had been standing in a different wing of the hospital entirely. Daniel looked back at the report. His badge number appeared clearly beside the access entry. Someone had used his ID. Around him, the atmosphere in the ward had shifted. A few nurses avoided eye contact. One doctor quietly gathered their tablet and stepped away. Rumors traveled fast inside hospitals. Faster than facts. and an HR email arriving minutes later only made things worse. Subject: incident under review, staff conduct. The message was short, clinical, and painfully public. Hospital administration had begun reviewing a potential breach of duty involving patient chart access and shift absence. No name mentioned, but everyone in that ward knew exactly who it referred to. Daniel felt a distance forming around him like invisible walls. Colleagues who once shared coffee during breaks suddenly had somewhere else to be. Conversations ended the moment he approached the nurse's station. Only one person hadn't moved. Dr. Sofia Ramirez stood at the far side of the ward reviewing a patient file. Her expression remained unreadable, but Daniel noticed something important. She wasn't looking at Karen. She was looking at the timestamp on the report, because that timestamp meant one undeniable thing. Someone had used Daniel's badge while he was somewhere else entirely. By the next afternoon, the situation had moved far beyond an embarrassing confrontation in the ICU. A formal incident report appeared in Daniel Carter's staff file. The document carried the official header of St. Bridget Mercy Hospital. It described a possible breach of patient supervision and unauthorized chart access. The language was clinical, but the implication was clear. Daniel Carter might have endangered a patient. Inside hospitals, those words traveled faster than gossip. Within hours, people began speaking differently around him. Some were polite but distant. Others avoided conversation entirely. In a place where trust meant everything, even a hint of misconduct could poison a reputation overnight. Karen Whitmore made sure the poison spread. She submitted 2 additional statements to administration before the day ended. Both claimed Daniel had left his ICU station during critical monitoring periods. Both implied his personal responsibilities were interfering with patient care. Her phrasing was careful. She never directly accused him of negligence. She simply raised concerns. Concerns were enough. Security was instructed to review badge activity logs for the previous week. Daniel heard about the investigation through whispers before anyone officially told him. A young nurse approached him quietly during a medication round. "They're checking badge swipes," she said under her breath. Daniel nodded. "I figured." He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. Instead, he kept working. Inside the ICU, patients still needed medication. Families still waited beside beds. Children still depended on calm voices and steady hands. Daniel gave them exactly that. But once his shift ended, he started paying closer attention. He requested access to the medication log from the night Karen had referenced in her complaint. It was a routine request. Nurses checked logs all the time when verifying treatments. When the system loaded, Daniel felt his stomach tighten. A medication entry appeared under his name. It recorded a dosage adjustment for a pediatric patient at 2:12 a.m. Daniel stared at the screen. He had never entered that record. The timestamp matched the same window Karen had used in her accusation. Someone had written a medication adjustment under his ID. That meant the accusation wasn't just about chart access. Someone was building a story. Daniel copied the entry number quietly into a small notebook he carried in his pocket. He didn't say anything to anyone yet. Across the city, Lily Carter was facing her own version of the situation. At school, children repeated whatever they heard at home. That afternoon, Lily sat quietly at the edge of the playground when 2 classmates walked past her. "My mom says her dad might lose his job," one of them whispered, "because he messed up at the hospital." The words were not meant for Lily, but she heard them anyway. She kept her head down and pretended not to notice. That evening, when Daniel picked her up, she was quieter than usual. "Everything okay, kid?" he asked gently. Lily nodded, but her small hand held his a little tighter than normal. Back at the hospital, the campaign against Daniel continued. Another printed report appeared in the nurse's office the following morning. This one summarized the alleged incident in neat paragraphs. Karen had clearly prepared it carefully. Daniel picked up the paper and read through the lines slowly. The story sounded convincing, too convincing. Then he noticed something strange. At the bottom of the document, the typed report included a handwritten note beside one paragraph. The handwriting wasn't part of the official printout. It was written in blue ink. Daniel looked closer. The letters were sharp and slanted slightly to the right. He had seen that writing before, more than once. Karen Whitmore had a habit of writing quick notes during administrative meetings. Her handwriting looked exactly like this. Daniel set the paper back on the counter without drawing attention. Something inside him had shifted. This wasn't just gossip or misunderstanding anymore. Someone was actively constructing evidence against him. And the deeper Daniel looked, the clearer one truth became. The sabotage wasn't coming from the ICU floor. It was coming from somewhere inside hospital administration. Daniel didn't confront anyone the next day. Hospitals ran on hierarchy and procedure. Accusations thrown too early could destroy the wrong person just as easily as the right one. If someone was trying to frame him, Daniel knew one thing clearly: emotion would only help them. Evidence would stop them. His shift began quietly, the early morning light filtering through the narrow windows of the pediatric ICU. Machines hummed. Nurses moved between beds with the practiced rhythm of routine care. Daniel waited until the first rush passed before approaching the charge nurse. Martha Bell had worked in the unit longer than almost anyone. She knew every medication protocol, every charting rule, and every nurse who had ever stepped onto the floor. "Martha," Daniel said quietly, holding his tablet, "can I double-check a medication entry from Tuesday night?" She looked up over her glasses. "You're not the only one being asked about that night," she replied. Daniel felt the weight of the words, but kept his voice calm. "I just want to verify the log." Martha nodded and logged into the central system. The medication chart for the patient appeared on the screen. She scrolled down slowly. "There," Daniel said. The entry sat in the middle of the page. Asked, 022212, dosage adjustment recorded by Daniel Carter. Martha frowned. "You don't remember doing this?" "No," Daniel answered. She leaned closer to the screen. "What were you doing around that time?" Daniel already knew the answer. "I was in the pharmacy corridor collecting medication for Ward C," he said. Martha clicked into the system history attached to the entry. A small window opened. The audit trail. Every action in the hospital system left a trace terminal location, login ID, and timestamp. Martha's eyebrows lifted slightly. "This entry wasn't logged from the ICU station," she said. Daniel leaned closer. The location field read, *Terminal B117 Administration Wing. That terminal sat 2 floors above the ICU. Daniel slowly exhaled. Someone had logged into his account from another department entirely. Martha turned toward him. "We didn't chart this from upstairs?" "No." She didn't answer immediately, but something in her expression shifted. "I'll make a note," she said carefully. "System discrepancies matter." Daniel thanked her and stepped away. But the deeper he looked, the stranger the story became. Later that afternoon, he visited the hospital's security office. Officer Malik handled staff badge access reviews. A former military policeman, he had the calm patience of someone used to reading quiet patterns. "I heard your badge was flagged," Malik said as Daniel entered. "Just checking activity records," Daniel replied. Malik opened the system. Rows of timestamps filled the screen. Door swipes, ward entries, staff access points. Daniel pointed to the time window around the alleged incident. Malik scanned the entries. "You swiped through the pharmacy corridor at 2008 a.m., he said. Daniel nodded. "And you entered Ward C at 2011. Malik leaned back. "But there's something else here." He tapped another entry. 3 days earlier. A system alert. Ash authentication failure. Duplicate signal detected. Malik frowned. That's unusual, he said. Sometimes happens when someone tries to clone a badge signal. Daniel felt a cold heaviness settle in his chest. Was it reported? Flagged automatically, Malik said. Didn't go anywhere unless someone followed up. Daniel left the office with more questions than answers. Back upstairs, Dr. Sofia Ramirez stood reviewing patient charts near the nurse's station. She looked up as Daniel approached. I reviewed the incident report, she said calmly. Daniel waited. The chart access location doesn't match your assigned workstation, she continued. Daniel said nothing. Ramirez studied him for a moment. Something about this complaint doesn't add up. That evening, Daniel requested the full system access logs tied to his hospital account. The IT terminal printed several pages of audit data, lines of timestamps, login records, terminal locations. Daniel sat in the empty staff room and began reading them slowly. The pattern became clear within minutes. His ID had been used several times outside the ICU floor, each entry connected to the administrative wing. But another name appeared in the system activity again and again beside those times. A secondary login. Administrative privileges. Daniel read the name twice to be certain. Arisk Karen Whitmore. Ask her admin account had accessed the same terminals only minutes before the actions recorded under Daniel's ID. Daniel placed the pages back on the table. The first real piece of truth now sat in his hands, but proof inside a notebook meant nothing without authority behind it. To expose what had happened, the evidence would have to move beyond whispers and suspicion. It would have to reach the one department in the hospital that couldn't ignore records: risk management. Daniel didn't rush to confront Karen. He had spent too many years in hospitals to make that mistake. Accusations meant nothing without documentation, and documentation only mattered when the right people saw it. So instead of reacting, Daniel began building a record. The first step was formal. At the start of his next shift, he submitted a written request to the hospital's internal system asking for a full audit review of his account activity for the past 7 days. The request was simple and neutral. No accusations. No emotional language, just a verification request. Systems like St. Bridget Mercy kept careful records, every chart access, every medication entry, every login location. If someone had used his ID from another terminal, the system would know. Daniel also attached the access log pages he had printed the night before. 2 hours later, Martha Bell called him into the nurse's station. I reviewed the medication chart discrepancy, the charge nurse said quietly. She held a printed form in her hand. I'm filing an official witness statement. Daniel blinked. You don't have to do that. Martha shook her head. Yes, I do. She tapped the page. I was supervising the ward that night. You were in the pharmacy corridor delivering medication to Ward C. That means the entry logged under your ID couldn't have been made here. Her signature appeared at the bottom of the form. Charge nurse verification carried weight in hospitals. It meant someone with authority over the ward had personally confirmed the timeline. Daniel placed the document carefully in his folder. One piece of evidence. But he needed more. Later that afternoon, he returned to the security office. Officer Malik had already begun reviewing corridor footage tied to the timestamp Daniel had provided. ICU hallway cameras store 48 hours before auto-overwrite, Malik said while loading the file. The screen flickered to life. Black and white video showed the quiet corridor outside the ward late at night. Nurses moved in and out occasionally, pushing medication carts or carrying charts. Malik fast-forwarded to the time Daniel had circled. Larstruce.2:13 a.m. Larstruce.02:13 a.m. The hallway was almost empty. Then a figure appeared at the end of the corridor. The person walked quickly toward the nurse's station entrance. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. Pause it, he said quietly. Malik froze the frame. The figure wore standard hospital scrubs and a visitor badge clipped to a lanyard. Their head turned briefly toward the camera as they passed beneath the hallway light. Malik zoomed in slightly. Daniel's pulse slowed into something colder, because the person entering the ward after hours wasn't a nurse, and the badge clipped to that lanyard wasn't a visitor pass. It was an asterisk administrative badge. The color strip was unmistakable. Malik rewound the footage again. "Whoever this is," he said slowly, "they shouldn't be in the ICU at that time." Daniel watched the figure step through the ward doors. The person moved with familiarity, not hesitation. They had been there before. Daniel knew exactly what that meant. The footage confirmed someone had entered the ward just minutes before the suspicious chart entry appeared under his ID. Another piece of evidence. Later that evening, an unexpected message appeared in Daniel's hospital inbox. Subject line: asterisk, staff access privileges. Internal reminder, asterisk. The email had been sent by Human Resources 2 weeks earlier. It outlined a strict policy. Administrative staff were asterisk not permitted asterisk to access clinical workstations and patient wards without a supervising nurse present. Daniel printed the email and added it to the growing folder. Now the pattern was undeniable. Access log showing his ID used from the administration wing. A charge nurse confirming he was somewhere else. CCTV showing an administrative badge entering the ward after hours. And an HR policy clearly stating that administrative staff were not authorized to use ICU terminals alone. 4 separate records. 4 pieces of proof pointing in the same direction. Daniel placed the documents into a neat stack and slid them into a folder. He wasn't just protecting his career anymore. 3 weeks from now, a judge would decide whether Lily Carter continued living with her father. Karen's accusations were meant to destroy that chance. Daniel would answer them with facts. The following morning, his audit request finally reached the department responsible for investigating hospital risk and compliance. By midday, the message came back. Risk management had reviewed the preliminary documents, and they were requesting an emergency meeting. That night, the apartment felt quieter than usual. Daniel unlocked the door and stepped inside, setting his bag down beside the kitchen table. The soft glow of the living room lamp filled the small space. Lily sat curled on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders and a schoolbook open in her lap. She looked up the moment he walked in. "Hi, Dad." Her voice sounded normal, but Daniel noticed the way she studied his face. Children sensed tension even when adults tried to hide it. Daniel forced a small smile and hung his jacket on the chair. "How was school?" Lily shrugged. "Okay." She hesitated, then closed the book slowly. "Are you going to lose your job?" The question landed harder than anything Karen had said in the hospital. Daniel sat beside her. "Why would you think that?" Lily looked down at the blanket in her hands. "2 kids in my class said their parents were talking about it," she murmured. "They said something bad happened at your hospital." Daniel felt the familiar pull between honesty and protection. He gently brushed a strand of hair from Lily's face. "People sometimes hear half a story and think it's the whole truth," he said softly. "But I didn't do anything wrong." Lily studied him carefully. "You promise?" "I promise." She nodded slowly. The worry still lingered in her eyes. After a moment, she leaned against his shoulder. Daniel held her quietly, because the truth was, the situation had grown far bigger than rumors in the hospital. Earlier that afternoon, Karen Whitmore had filed a motion with the family court requesting an asterisk expedited custody hearing. 3 weeks had suddenly become 3 days. Karen's argument was simple. If Daniel Carter was under investigation at his workplace for negligence, Lily should not remain in his care while the matter was unresolved. The legal notice arrived by email. Daniel read it twice before closing the laptop. Karen was moving fast. She believed pressure would break him. Back at St. Bridget Mercy Hospital, the internal investigation was also accelerating. Risk Management had reviewed the audit request Daniel submitted. The department handled everything from patient safety incidents to internal misconduct. When they became involved, hospital leadership paid attention. By evening, a confidential memo had already reached the hospital board. The document summarized the situation in clear language. Asterisk. Possible misuse of staff credentials. Potential falsification of clinical records. Administrative staff access violation. Asterisk. Attached were the first pieces of documentation Daniel had gathered. Access logs. Security badge alerts. The medication chart discrepancy. And Martha Bell's witness statement confirming Daniel's location during the alleged incident. The memo also included something new. A preliminary risk management report. Unlike rumors or accusations, the report followed strict procedure. Every claim had to be backed by system records or witness verification. The document laid out the timeline carefully, minute by minute. Someone had used Daniel Carter's ID to access hospital systems from a different department. Someone had entered the ICU after hours using administrative clearance. Someone had created a record that did not match the nurse's actual location. Inside the hospital administration building, Karen Whitmore knew nothing about the report yet. From her perspective, the plan was unfolding perfectly. The incident complaint had reached HR. The custody hearing had been pushed forward. Daniel's reputation was already eroding among staff. Karen believed Daniel had no real defense. No witnesses willing to speak. No documentation strong enough to challenge her claims. But inside a folder sitting on Daniel's kitchen table, the truth had begun to assemble itself piece by piece. 5 separate records now told the same story. A medication log entry created under Daniel's ID. A time-stamped CCTV recording showing someone entering the ward. A charge nurse's sworn statement confirming Daniel's location. A security system alert about attempted badge duplication. And a hospital policy email proving administrative staff were never authorized to access ICU terminals alone. 5 documents. 5 quiet facts waiting to be seen. Late that night, Daniel placed the folder carefully into his work bag, because the next step would not happen in a hallway argument or a rumor-filled ward. It would happen in front of people who had the authority to examine every detail. And tomorrow morning, before the custody hearing began, Daniel Carter would walk into the hospital's risk management office, where the truth would finally be forced into the open. The risk management office sat on the quiet side of the hospital administration floor. No alarms echoed there, no rushing stretchers or anxious families, just glass walls, closed doors, and the quiet weight of decisions that could end careers. Daniel arrived 10 minutes early. The folder in his hands felt heavier than paper should. Inside the conference room, 3 people already sat around the table. Michael Grant, head of risk management, reviewed documents through thin reading glasses. Beside him sat a hospital legal advisor and the director of clinical operations. Karen Whitmore stood near the opposite side of the table. Her expression held the same confidence Daniel had seen in the ICU days earlier. She believed this meeting would confirm everything she had claimed. "Mr. Semblace." "Carter," Grant said calmly as Daniel entered, "please take a seat." Daniel sat without speaking. Karen folded her arms. "I'm glad we're finally addressing this," she said. "Patient safety should come first." Grant didn't respond immediately. Instead, he opened a thin folder in front of him. "Let's begin with the audit review requested by Mr. Carter," he said. A screen on the wall lit up. The first slide showed system access logs. Rows of timestamps appeared with terminal numbers beside them. Grant tapped a key. "This entry shows patient chart access under Daniel Carter's ID at 02:14 a.m. Tuesday," he said. Karen nodded slightly. "Exactly." Grant pressed another key, but the terminal location was Administration Wing B17. Karen's expression flickered for the first time. "That's probably a system sync issue," she said quickly. Grant ignored the comment. We compared this entry with staff badge access records. Another slide appeared. The timestamp of Daniel's badge, swipe into the pharmacy corridor. Then another swipe into Ward C, both within the same minute window. Grant folded his hands. Mr. Carter could not physically access the administrative terminal at that time. Karen shifted slightly. Grant pressed another key. The room darkened as CCTV footage filled the screen. A grainy corridor appeared. Timestamp, *02:13 a.m. Asterisk. A figure walked toward the ICU doors. Grant paused the image. Security footage from the ICU hallway, he said. The camera zoomed slightly. The badge on the figure's chest became visible. Administrative clearance. Karen spoke again, her voice sharper. This proves nothing. Staff walk through that hallway all the time. Grant nodded calmly. Correct. He pressed another key. The image zoomed further. The figure turned toward the camera. The room fell silent, because the face in the footage was unmistakable. Karen Whitmore. No one spoke for several seconds. Grant let the silence sit. Then he continued. Next, we reviewed system login records tied to the terminal used that night. Another document appeared on the screen. 2 login entries. 1 administrative account, 1 nurse account. The administrative login appeared first. Grant read the name aloud. Karen Whitmore. Karen's voice rose. That's not possible. Grant remained calm. The login occurred 3 minutes before Mr. Carter's credentials were used. The legal advisor beside him slid another document across the table. A charge nurse statement confirms Mr. Carter was in another ward delivering medication, she said. Grant added one final document to the screen. Hospital HR policy. Administrative staff were not authorized to access clinical workstations without supervision. Grant looked directly at Karen. You accessed a restricted terminal. You then used another staff member's credentials to create a medical chart entry. Karen shook her head quickly. That's ridiculous. But the room had already shifted. The director of clinical operations spoke quietly. This constitutes falsification of clinical documentation. Grant closed the folder in front of him. And attempted credential misuse. The words landed like a final stamp. Karen's plan had collapsed inside the hospital before it ever reached the courtroom. Later that afternoon, the custody hearing began. Daniel sat quietly beside his lawyer while Karen and her sister presented their claims. They repeated the same accusations Karen had used in the hospital: negligence, unsafe working conditions, a father distracted by responsibilities he couldn't manage. Then the judge leaned forward. I've received additional documentation from St. Bridget Mercy Hospital, he said. Karen's confidence faltered. The judge opened the folder slowly. These records include an internal investigation conducted this morning. The courtroom remained silent as he reviewed the pages. System access logs, CCTV timestamps, witness testimony, the official risk management report. Karen's voice suddenly sounded small. Your Honor, those documents. The judge raised a hand. Ms. Whitmore, according to these records, you falsified hospital documentation. The courtroom fell completely still. The judge closed the folder. The accusations against Mr. Carter are as supported. Karen's entire case collapsed in a single moment. Outside the courtroom later that day, Daniel returned to the hospital for one final meeting. Michael Grant stood waiting near the administrative office. I owe you an apology, he said plainly. The hospital should have reviewed the records sooner. Daniel nodded. Grant handed him a document. Official notice clearing his record of all allegations. Another letter followed. Karen Whitmore had been suspended pending formal disciplinary action for misconduct and falsification of clinical data. Daniel placed the papers carefully back into his folder. For the first time in weeks, the weight on his shoulders began to lift. But clearing his name wasn't the only thing that mattered, because when Daniel walked through the door that evening, Lily ran straight into his arms. And in that moment, he realized the real victory had nothing to do with courtrooms or hospital reports. It was the quiet certainty that the one person who mattered most still believed in him. The next few days felt strangely quiet. For weeks, Daniel Carter had lived inside a storm of rumors, accusations, and quiet stares in hospital corridors. Now the noise had faded, leaving something calmer behind. 3 days after the court hearing, the official letter arrived. It came from St. Bridget Mercy Hospital Administration, stamped with the hospital seal and signed by the Director of Clinical Operations. Daniel opened it slowly at the kitchen table while Lily colored beside him. The letter was clear and direct. The internal investigation had concluded that Daniel Carter had not committed any violation of patient care or hospital policy. The system misuse had been traced to administrative credential abuse, and the hospital formally cleared Daniel of all accusations. His professional record was restored completely. Daniel folded the paper carefully. Across the table, Lily looked up. "Is that the hospital letter?" Daniel nodded. "It says everything's okay." Lily's shoulders relaxed in a way that made Daniel realize just how much she had been carrying quietly. At the hospital, the atmosphere had changed as well. The following morning, Daniel stepped back into the pediatric ICU, expecting the same careful distance from his coworkers. Instead, Martha Bell greeted him with a small smile. "Morning, Carter." The tone was normal again. A few nurses nodded as they passed. One of the junior doctors even stopped to ask about a patient update, the way they always had before the investigation. Hospitals ran on trust, and now the truth had finally restored it. Later that afternoon, Daniel finished updating a chart when Dr. Sofia Ramirez approached him near the nurses' station. She held a tablet in one hand, but her expression was softer than he had ever seen it. "I read the final report," she said. Daniel waited. "I should have spoken up sooner," she continued. "Something about the complaint never felt right." Daniel shook his head slightly. "You reviewed the evidence when it mattered." Ramirez nodded once. "If you ever need support with scheduling or patient assignments," she added, "my department can help." It was the closest thing to an apology Daniel expected. And in a hospital like this, quiet respect often meant more than words. That evening, Daniel arrived home just before sunset. Lily sat at the small kitchen table finishing her homework. When she saw him, she immediately jumped up and ran over. "Dad!" She wrapped her arms around him tightly. "I told my teacher you didn't do anything wrong," she said proudly. Daniel laughed softly. "Oh yeah?" She said she believed me. Lily stepped back and looked up at him with the kind of certainty only children could have. "I always knew you'd fix it," she said. Daniel felt something warm settle in his chest. Through the rumors, the court hearing, and the long nights of uncertainty, one thing had never changed. His daughter believed in him, and that belief had carried him further than anger ever could. Daniel pulled Lily into another hug, because sometimes the biggest victories weren't loud. Sometimes they arrived quietly in the form of a cleared record, a restored reputation, and a child who never stopped trusting her father. Some battles are fought in silence. But in the end, truth always finds its voice. If this story moved you, hit like it. Helps these dad stories reach more people. Subscribe to Just Dad Things for more single dad stories about courage, healing, and second chances. And tell me in the comments what moment hit you the hardest.